Hello everybody and welcome to my first drive of the brand new Kia EV6, without a doubt one of the most important cars to come from the ever-growing Korean manufacturer, well, ever. If you are still unsure of the importance of the EV, I'd like to point out that over the last year and a bit, almost every single market sector in the automotive industry has either seen only a very steady growth or in some cases a decline for various reasons, yet interest in EVs continues to grow at a serious pace. The last few years really have seen the market explode too, and customers now have a real choice. Nowadays, it simply isn't good enough to take an existing platform, chuck some batteries and an electric motor or two at it and call it done. You need a bespoke platform and a USP or two if you want to have any chance of getting some real market share, and all of the big players have now weighed in. Even companies like Volkswagen Group, which only recently had some pretty half-hearted offerings like the Audi e-tron, now have a full range of pretty decent cars. Things like the Skoda Enyaq that I drove, the VW ID3 and ID4, and those are doing very well. BMW are getting in on it too with the new iX. Ford have brought us the Mustang Mach-E, and several manufacturers have already announced their intention to go fully electric before the 2030 or 2035 cutoff. That includes companies like Polestar, and the Polestar 2 I drove very recently, so that's a car I'm going to be drawing a lot of comparisons with because it sits in more or less the same market as this. It follows a very similar format. This is really a sort of crossover SUV type thing, so it's a tall, sleek hatch looking affair. This has quite a bit of space in it, so you can really get 4 or 5 adults in here. Boot space is actually pretty good too, compared to some of the early electric cars and some hybrids like the Toyota Corolla. It's actually very usable. In fact, space really is a theme throughout the EV6, and the whole cabin has been designed to give you lots and lots of space and storage. And I've got to say, one of the best cars I've ever driven in that regard. And when you're looking at something that is aimed at being a daily drivable, usable, probably sole car for some, that is important. Every door has space for a big bottle of water. There is a load of storage down here. This glove box is absolutely cavernous. And like I said, the boot is not too bad either. Up front, you get only a cursory little storage bin, which will take one charging cable and no more, so that's not really anything to write home about, but that's not a surprise. As ever, the Kia does have a sister car over at Hyundai, and that's the new Ioniq. That's a car that's been getting some quite decent reviews of late, but is aimed at, I think, a slightly different customer. It's got different styling, it's somewhat more conventional. This is a more sort of sporting affair because of the way that rear looks. This, I think, is a little bit more aggressive, but overall they are a very similar thing. I have yet to experience the Hyundai. In fact, I've not even seen one in the flesh, so I'm unable to draw any comparisons with that car. Kia give you in the UK 3 different trim levels to choose from. There is the base Air, then the GT line, and the GT line S, which is this one. These will be joined next year by the GT, and that's quite exciting, but more on that in a bit. As seems to be the norm now with electric cars, you've got a choice of either single rear-wheel drive or dual motor all-wheel drive. The Air comes solely with the rear-wheel drive single motor setup, and the other 2 you can choose. So the base car comes with around 220 odd horsepower, and this is 321. Torque is up quite a bit because it's got the extra motor, so it's over 600 newton meters, that's 400 something pound-feet. Pricing is also interesting, particularly compared with the Polestar, because at the bottom of the range it's actually slightly more. The Polestar begins at just under £40,000, whereas this starts at just over £40,000. But the 2 companies do things quite differently. With the Polestar, you then choose which engine you want, and on top of that, you can specify several option packs. If you go the whole hog, like the Polestar press car that I had, that winds up with a car that costs about £62,000. This is 52, and currently it's as far as you can take the EV6. The GT is not going to be dramatically more, and that's going to pack nearly 600 horsepower. Once that arrives, I think Polestar might have a little bit of a problem. This does things quite a different way. With Polestar, they've gone the sort of very modern, sleek way of having one enormous tablet in the middle and then not really much else in the way of controls, barring the steering wheel and the stalks. The Polestar runs Android Automotive, whereas this has an evolution of Kia's regular infotainment system. So you still have, if you want it, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, although Android Auto at least is not wireless, and that's a bit of a surprise. I think that would have been a real boost if it were. There are no real options to choose from with the Kia lineup. The way you do it is with the trim. On this top trim level, the GT Line S, you'll get extras like slightly larger wheels, you get this sunroof which does open and is quite nice, although not a fully panoramic job. That's a bit of a disappointment. You also get automatic opening door handles, heated rear seats, and some other goodies too, like this Meridian 14 speaker sound system that they call premium and upmarket, but I don't think it's actually very good. Clarity is fine, and if you're listening to talk radio, it's perfectly decent, but there's not really much bass in it, and that seems to be a theme of many of these new sound systems in hybrids and electric cars. I wonder if they're concerned that a meaty subwoofer is going to draw just a little bit too much power. In terms of power, in the UK there is a choice of only one battery pack. Most other manufacturers offer you the choice of either a small or a big battery pack, and then if you have the small engine with the big battery pack, that's often what they call the long range model. Kia, I think wisely, have decided not to do that. All the cars in the UK get the 77 kilowatt hour battery pack. Elsewhere there is the option of a 58 kilowatt hour system, but I think they were right not to bring that here and to keep things simple. In terms of expected range, the claim is for about 300 miles give or take combined. But this is one area where I think electric cars still don't help themselves. You see, they work exactly the opposite to your regular combustion engine car, where you'll get your best fuel economy on the motorway and your worst in the city. Electric cars, precisely the opposite. So this will have a combined range of 300 miles, but in the city, they say it's over 400. Unfortunately, if you're on the motorway, it then goes the other way. So I would say, based on experience, you can probably get between 200 to 250 miles on a charge if you are cruising. There was, in the spec sheet that I saw, no official figure for sort of motorway range. I think the powers that be need to introduce a standardized 70 mile an hour, AC on, stereo on, heated seats on test on a normal day like today, where it's about 12-13 degrees, so it's not toasty warm, but it's not freezing either. And that, I think, is going to be a real useful metric to people that actually do want to use these cars and do big miles. Because the fact is, in the city, having a big range is totally meaningless because you don't tend to do many miles in a city. Those who've tried to drive through somewhere like London or LA will know that doing 10 miles takes quite some time. 100 miles in a city is more or less impossible to do in a day. It just cannot be done in most of them. And so it's only when you're going to do longer journeys on the motorway where range is important. And so I think it's vital to have an honest number for what you're going to get when you are traveling at higher speeds. But that's not Kia's fault. That's just something that I've observed of late. I think it'd be better for everybody if we start bringing in numbers that are going to be a bit more real world. As the EV progresses, it's going to become harder and harder, I think, to win over some customers, because the ones who've already bought into it are people that more or less convince themselves. And as more people buy the product, the ones that remain are going to become increasingly harder to convince. I was reading through the spec sheet, and if you do buy one of these, there are of course a few things you get. So you could have a 7 kilowatt wall charger installed at home, standard pretty much with most electric cars. Importantly, if you do have one of those, you can charge this car fully overnight. Between 7 and 8 hours should take this car from more or less nothing to about full, and that's very useful. However, if you are out and about charging at public points, Kia do have a system where you can get discounted charging at a lot of different places, including Ionity, whose base charging rate is absolutely criminal. About 70 pence a kilowatt hour. To give you an idea of just how much that is, charging at home you're probably going to be paying more like 5 or 6 pence a kilowatt hour. And then at, say, the GridServe station near Braintree, where we should be going tomorrow for part of this journey, they charge about 25 pence a kilowatt hour, and you don't need any sort of special card or discount or anything to get that pricing. The EV in general still has quite a way to go. However, there is an awful lot about this particular car that I think Kia have got absolutely right. First off, it is a car you can very easily just get in and drive. That can't be said of all of these. The Polestar 2 in particular had a throttle pedal that I found absolutely frustrating. There isn't, as far as I can tell, a one-pedal drive mode in this car. You do have some nice stuff though, like for example, on the key there is a setting where you can get the car to move forwards or backwards into its parking space. I tried to get it to do this earlier and it didn't want to, so it might be because this is an early car that it's disabled, or it might be that I'm doing it wrong. So I shall ask the people at Kia later and see if I can get it working. Generally speaking, all the interior is more or less as you'd expect a car to be. There are some niggles that I have. For example, the lane keep assist, as is legislated now, will keep turning itself back on. If you live in the sticks like me, lane keep assist is just an annoyance because the roads are so narrow and modern cars are so big, it's almost impossible to do a lot of journeys without being more or less on the white line the whole time. That means in particularly large cars, and this was a real issue in stuff like the Audi Q7, the car will want to push you into a hedge. Not all roads have a white line down the side like this one, so you find yourself getting a little bit stuck as the car tries to force you off the road. Or if nothing else, we'll just keep going beep, and that's annoying. I like the two-spoke steering wheel, it's very retro-futuristic, and I like the fact that Kia have resisted the temptation of going the VW route and making all the controls touch. So most of your basic stuff you've still got a physical button for. I can change the temperature in the cabin, I can change the volume, I can change the radio station, I can do all sorts of stuff with a real proper button. There are some cool pieces of tech down here. If you want to look at more of the car in general, I did a little walk around with this car when it was first introduced into the country, and in future I hope to do a more detailed video. That's why this is a first drive. I find particularly with electric cars, there's only so much you can ever learn with one day. You really do need at least a week to get a proper feel for them, what they're like and how easy they are to live with. So next year, with luck, Kia will send me a proper press car and I'll then give you my thoughts in more detail. I am on my lonesome today, which is why you won't be seeing much of my usual sort of B-roll exterior and drive-by footage. Luckily, Kia do provide a very, very good library of stuff, and I'll try and show you some of the different colours on option as well. There aren't too many to choose from. I believe there's 6 premium colours, they say, so that normally means there's some base colours as well. This is a very nice looking red. They also had some blues, but I gotta say that the red suits it really quite nicely. And one area the Polestar is certainly superior is in its performance. The one I drove in particular was the Performance Pack, although that doesn't actually make it any faster. What it does give you is Öhlins dual flow valve dampers, and when you're having a lot of fun, those are absolutely sensational. However, the rest of the time, I think they were just far too firm. This, much better set up as a real good balance of sportiness, but also comfort too. I know this road pretty well, and the suspension is doing a pretty good job, I have to say. But with 321 horsepower, this is some 80 shy of the Polestar. And critically, although the Polestar's pedal was a little bit frustrating, if you did put your foot all the way down, it would give you that big hit in the back that's the real sort of drug a lot of people have become addicted to with EVs. This won't do that. So I'm doing 45 mile an hour now, and if I put my foot down, it'll move you forwards a bit, but it's not that kind of rocket ship, bang, instant torque. In fact, there's a little power graph here, and no matter how quick I put my foot down, the car will still feed the power in relatively smoothly. The GT, I'm sure, will change that. Visibility is fairly good. This A-pillar is quite chunky, but doesn't seem too intrusive, and there are some really neat things too. For example, when you indicate, you actually get a little camera on here turn on, and you'll see a screen on the dash, and it will show you basically your rear wheel, which is very, very funky. It's a blind spot thing, essentially, and it works really quite well. The first time I saw it, I was a little bit confused, but actually, it's really quite helpful, especially as this B-pillar here is quite large. I have noticed though that either that or this door do rattle when you turn the stereo up, and when you consider it doesn't really have a lot of bass or punch in it, that's a touch disappointing. This may be because these are all early examples of the EV6, so customer cars might not do that, but it did seem worth noting because most Kias I drive seem to be screwed together pretty well, so to hear any squeak or rattle is quite unusual. I would say the dash down here does seem to be a little bit of a missed opportunity. Manufacturers vary greatly as to how much they've taken advantage of the fact that nearly all dashboards now are all digital. So some have done really quite well. The best, I think, is still Audi. They've yet to be beaten. The worst maybe being Jaguar and some others. The Kia, unfortunately, is at the sort of bottom end of that list because although it's quite pretty, it doesn't really do all that much. In fact, I wouldn't be that far off saying the dashboard is nearly redundant, because this car does have a very nice heads-up display. It's what they call augmented reality, so if I had navigation and things on, it would actually be showing me quite a lot of information. At the moment, all I've got is my speed and the speed limit warning. Speed limit warning, incidentally, Kia seem to get right most of the time. It's something BMW constantly struggle with. This has been reasonably accurate in the fairly short time that I've been driving it. All of the stuff over here will be familiar to anybody that's driven any Kia or Hyundai product from the last 10 years. It's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit shinier, it's a little bit nicer, it's a little bit slicker. It's just an improvement, it's not a reinvention of the wheel. Kia have always seemed to give you quite a lot for your money compared with their rivals, and the EV6 is absolutely no exception. So not only do you have heated seats, but you've got ventilation in them as well. In fact, I think this is a cooled seat, not merely ventilated, and yes, there is a difference. You've also got a heated steering wheel too. This is an electric with memory seat as well, and has quite a bit of adjustment in it, including lumbar and everything. It's actually really quite nice, and I have to say, very comfortable. I like the overall design of the interior. The Polestar is maybe a little bit better in terms of interior materials over the Kia, but the one I drove had the £4,000 optional interior. This is just how these come, and I've got to say, it is rather nice, although you've got some patches of white in here to lift it a little bit, with some bits of chrome and some very nice design touches up front. The front seats are absolutely fine, but it's in the rear where it does seem just, well, a little bit cave-like. I had hoped that the sunroof on here would be a full panoramic item, but because it's not, there's very little light back there. Doesn't help when the windows are tinted either. Very common thing now. Speaking of windows, these are only single glazed. For some reason in the last few years I've seen double glazing start to appear on all sorts of stuff, including even the DS4 that I drove recently. However, the car is still fairly quiet. Wind and road noise are not too bad. They're there. It's not silent, but it is overall pretty good, and that means it's a very, very comfortable car to do the big miles in. Handling has often been a bit of a Kia trump card too. They don't really have much of a reputation for it, but many of these I've driven have been really quite excellent drivers' cars. Once upon a time, Kia did employ the services of Lotus's former handling guru, Roger Becker, but these days they've got a selection of both their own and pinched BMW staff, including former M guru Albert Biermann. The EV6, I'm happy to report, continues the tradition. The steering has a beautiful weighting to it in anything but eco mode, where it's quite light, and that's probably appropriate for a city setting. Although it doesn't really have any feedback at all, I could say the same of some dedicated sports cars. What you do get is a real keen turn in, a sense of plenty of grip, a good connection with the road, and it's a car you aren't afraid to hustle. If anything, for an environment like this, where the road surface can be quite demanding, I find this is actually a more enjoyable car to pilot than the Polestar. That worked really well when you were going absolutely hell for leather, but the rest of the time just seemed to punish you a little bit. This works with the road, not against it. It feels lovely, this thing, it really does. It's just that motor which really lets it down, because it fails to give you that punch and response that you really want from a proper electric car. But it's brisk enough. Given the size and weight of this car, I would say the dual motor is certainly something worth having for the majority of customers. As it is, the car does okay, but if you shaved 100 horsepower out of this, I don't think it would be that enjoyable to drive. As it is though, this video is all about first impressions, and I've got to say, the EV6 really has impressed me. I'm looking forward to spending quite a bit more time with it, and then I'll be able to tell you about more of its quirks and features and all that sort of stuff that you really want to know when you're going to be living with a car. And the EV6 GT is really going to be one to watch. So there we are. A big thank you to Kia for having me on their event. Thanks to you for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you for the next one. Bye bye.